limits, man. Whoa. Okay, calm down.
I'm personally still in shock at the murder of Refaat. I can't say it's a surprise because Israel has been systematically targeting and murdering academics, intellectuals, journalists, doctors. It's exterminating. When I was on your show last, I said this was a holocaust, and that's what it is. When you think of a holocaust, and they're wiping everyone out. Mahmoud said that he's a student at IUG. IUG doesn't exist anymore. Israel wiped it out. It wiped out most of the universities in Gaza. It murdered the president of IUG. It targeted him in his home, Dr. Sufyan Taye, a top scientist in Gaza, in Palestine, and the president of IUG. Refaat Alareer, if we just go by his titles, it really doesn't tell you the story. Refaat was a professor of English literature at IUG, and that was an important part of his identity, but it's only a small part. It's hard for me to describe to you Refaat. In the last few days, since he was murdered on Wednesday, December 6th, in a targeted assassination by Israel at his sister's home in Gaza. He was murdered along with his sister and 3 of her children, and his brother and one of his brother's children. And a few days earlier, Refaat had been with his family in a UN shelter when he received a phone call from someone identifying himself as an Israeli officer, and told him that the Israeli forces knew where he was and that they were advancing towards where he was. Of course, this is in a context where Israel has arrested many of Gaza's civic leaders and figures, including, for example, Dr. Mohammed Abu Salmiya, who's the director of Al-Shifa Hospital, which Israel raided and destroyed after telling outrageous lies about that there was a command center underneath it. And Dr. Abu Salmiya is now held incommunicado by Israel. So Refaat received this phone call. He went to his sister's home, perhaps thinking that it was less conspicuous than an overcrowded UN shelter. And perhaps also, and I'm sure of this, because he didn't want to endanger all the other people in the school by staying there. And the missile that was fired at the building where he was targeted just at that one apartment. So it was very clear that this was an assassination. His assassination followed an incitement campaign online, which was coming from a lot of prominent pro-Israel voices, including Bari Weiss, the former New York Times writer, opinion. I'm not even sure what Bari Weiss is now, but she was inciting against him over a joke he told on Twitter. That joke was about one of the many fake stories Israel told about October 7th. This fake story, this lie, this blood libel that Palestinians had baked a Jewish baby in an oven. This came after the fake story of 40 beheaded Jewish babies. And Refaat made a joke mocking that lie. And Bari Weiss and other violent anti-Palestinian racists spun that as if Refaat was like celebrating the murder of Jewish babies, an utter lie, an utter disgusting lie. But it ended up killing him. The fact that he told a joke, and Bari Weiss put a target on his back, and the Israeli army killed him. And Refaat was incredibly funny. For the past few months, I was texting with him almost every day, except during the days when the internet cutoff made it impossible. He never complained. He described utter horrors that he was going through, that his family was going through, that everyone in Gaza was going through, but he never complained. He always said, "We are fine, and alhamdulillah." And he did his best to help people till his very last day. And it's, you know, what can we say about Refaat? Mahmoud is one of hundreds of students that he has taught and trained and turned into confident and wonderful writers. And we're proud that Mahmoud is one of the contributors to the Electronic Intifada. And Mahmoud wrote a beautiful tribute to Refaat, which I think maybe we can even flash on the screen just to show people. Refaat has been called the man who taught Gaza to speak English. He's also been called the storyteller of Gaza because he, through his teaching of English and teaching of English writing, he opened Gaza to the world, and he opened the world to young people in Gaza who've been living under siege there for so many years, cut off from the world. And I'll just say in closing that, I mean, as you can see, we could go on endlessly about Refaat, but he played such an important role for the Electronic Intifada because he introduced us to so many wonderful writers. If you go over to the Electronic Intifada today, you see that we're publishing more original reportage from the ground in Gaza in the English language than I think any other publication in the world. And almost all of those writers are people who've been trained by Refaat or nurtured or mentored by Refaat. And during this war, during the bombardment, he never stopped working. He never stopped doing that work he loved. He would be helping writers in Gaza to write while the bombs were falling. He would be sending me their articles by WhatsApp. He would be introducing me to new writers when he couldn't find food for his children. And so he played a tremendously important role. We had him on the Electronic Intifada's live stream 5 times, I believe, during the past 2 months, whenever we could, but it was so hard to get him because of the connectivity. And the last time was just a week before he was murdered. We had him for a brief period until the electricity cut out. But he was a wonderful person. He was, I'll say, he was the rare person that knew hundreds and thousands of people, and each and every one of you, one of them will tell you that he paid intense attention to them personally. He cared for them personally, and you felt that when you talked to him, that you were the only person in the world. And this was a man who had responsibility for dozens of family members in the last few months to try to look after and care for amid this genocide. And yet he continued to support everyone. He supported me. He comforted me far more than I could comfort him these past 2 months. And I can't say enough about him and how angry I am at his murder, along with the murder of so many other people in Gaza right now.
In addition to Bari Weiss, who tweeted about Refaat, you also had Jen Smith, a reporter at Daily Mail, who wrote a piece called Palestinian Professor Previously Published by the New York Times Makes Sick Joke about claim Hamas baked, all caps, baby in an oven. So I'm sure that also brought a lot of negative attention to him, the fact that she would write this article. And what's interesting, of course, is nowhere in the article does she say that it was based on something that was untrue, nor does she say, but babies have been murdered. Not that she'd say that, but babies have been killed. Palestinian.
Palestinian babies, thousands, but in the whole of October 7th, and all of Israel's lies are starting to unravel now about October 7th. The lies about the mass rapes, the lies about the supernova rave, where it's now becoming increasingly clear that Israeli helicopters killed many of the people there. We don't know the exact number, but today in the Israeli press, we just published an article at the Electronic Intifada by our colleague Gazan and Stanley, citing the Israeli army now admitting that there were, in their words, immense amounts of friendly fire on October 7th. I digress, though. The one thing I want to add, though, Katie, is that the murder of Refaat on December the 6th was the second attempt on his life, because Israel attacked his own building, his own apartment building in Gaza City in late October. And at that time, he and his family were displaced, and then they were displaced several more times from their home. And at one point, a few days after his home was bombed, he said to me that a neighbor had been able to go over and see. He said, our building was almost completely, it was damaged beyond repair. And he said, the books, the thousands of books I collected over 30 years have been destroyed. And I replied to him, I said, Refaat, the books can be replaced. You can't be replaced. So we don't mind about the books. We're just glad that you're safe. And he said to me, he answered in these exact words, all those pieces by my students, that's what keeps me going. This is how committed this man was to his students and to his broader mission of informing the world about Palestine and telling the truth through stories and reportage.